What's up, YouTube? I am the Vanilla Nerd, and today I get to review Avengers Age of Ultron. And this movie has only aged better with time. Originally, when it first came out, it was kind of derided because there was all this expectation that it had to be as good as Captain America the Winter Soldier and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, the two movies that had just preceded it. We had all this hype and excitement, but then it wasn't that good. But it's kind of unfair to compare it to those two movies because Captain America the Winter Soldier and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 are seen as two of the best films in all of the MCU. So it's kind of unfair. And now that we've seen all these other MCU films and we get this full picture of the Infinity Saga and everything, I think I've definitely personally come to appreciate this movie more, and a lot of other people have too. I really enjoy this film. It's not a perfect movie. It's not great, but it has its strengths. It has its charm and stuff. And at this point in my life, I honestly don't know if I prefer Avengers 1 or Avengers 2 more. They both have their problems. They both have their strengths. And they're both really good movies. So that's what we're going to talk about today. That's what we're going to get into, is not just the character, plot, and setting, but also the legacy of this film. And in light of that, I want to say that there will be major spoilers for this movie and really the entirety of the first three phases of the MCU. So you've been warned. Heavy spoilers for Avengers Age of Ultron moving forward. Let's go. So, in talking about character, it's interesting because this film doesn't really have any dynamic characters outside of the Maximoff Twins who go from being bad to being good. At least not dynamic in the traditional sense of changing. However, in terms of character development, these characters are very dynamic because they grow, and the movie makes an effort to develop every single one of the Avengers and even all three of our main villains throughout the entire film. This film may spend too much time doing so, but it does develop them, and I love that. So, for the main Avengers, this development mainly happens through the dreams of Wanda Maximoff. And this is a plot point that even I myself am a little bit confused by. But as best as I understand it, she reads the minds of her victims and discovers their greatest fear, and then develops a vision based on that fear to prey on them and to make them worry and stuff. And the fact that she doesn't use this power ever again is really bothersome to me, but that's a topic for another day. So, right now, with character, I want to go through each of the Avengers and each one of the villains and talk about the fears that they have. And the villains, not so much the fears, but just how they're developed and stuff. So we're going to do that one by one. It will be a little bit longer of a video, but I will do my best to go through it quickly and fastly. So starting off with Iron Man, he's the character that got the most development in this film, just like in the last Avengers movie. And you could almost argue that he is truly dynamic in the sense that he changes and realizes that he is a danger to the world and that superheroes are dangerous and that he shouldn't be messing with artificial intelligence. But I don't think he fully accepts that until the beginning of Captain America Civil War, the next movie. So I don't think it's right to fully say that he's dynamic in that sense. But it does have the character development just like anybody else. And his fear is the fact that he isn't smart enough to outthink the alien invasion that he believes is coming. Because at any point, he's worried that an alien invasion could attack Earth and stuff. And, I mean, the movie spells this out for us, so it's not very hard to see. But I think it's cool that not only does he have that fear, and that leads him to create Ultron and the armor around the world and everything, but he also has the fear that he'll be the last man standing. And I think there's the sense of sadness that he'll miss all of his friends, but I think even greater than that, there's the sense of guilt that he didn't do all he could to save the world. And that guilt drags on him, and we'll see him overcome that fear in a later movie. But for now, I think that's really cool that they set that up this early. Next, we move on to Captain America, my personal favorite Avenger, and first and foremost, his new suit is so cool. It looks so much better than the first suit that he had in Avengers 1, although his very first suit in Captain America, the First Avenger, is fantastic, perfect, wouldn't change a thing. But this suit, so good. And I think it's evidence that it's so good is the fact that it stays around not just for this movie, but also Captain America Civil War. And a tarnished version of it is seen in Avengers Infinity War, which is just awesome. So, new suit is really cool. Also, I love Captain America's increased role in this movie. He just has a lot more screen time and is given a lot more love and attention, which I think is great, and that is most notably seen in his debates with Iron Man. Those are so fantastic, pitting these two kind of against each other in prep for Civil War, but also just as friends. It works so well. It's like it's natural that they would have differing opinions, that they would see the world from these two different lenses. They both make good points. They're both trying to help people, but they're doing it in such different ways that they come into conflict, and that is fantastic. And then there's Captain America's fear of settling down and, quote, putting down the shield. And that is shown beautifully in the little vision. I think it worked really well how short that vision was comparatively. And it's interesting because at the end of this film, he tries to accept that he won't be able to settle down, that he can't settle down. But what his character needs is to learn to give himself some time. And I think that's really a cool kind of complex character because he is under this false sense of acceptance of, oh yeah, I just won't be able to settle down and that's okay and I can live my life that way. But as we see in later movies, he can't live his life that way and he does need to learn to be able to settle down. So I think that's really fascinating, really well done, and again, a fantastic early setup for future Captain America development. Next, I want to talk about Thor, and Thor is really cool in this film. Yet again, he is shown to be an absolute powerhouse of an Avenger. He can take a hit, he flies really cool, and he has lightning that kills tens of troops at a time. Speaking of which, his hammer is so cool. I really liked how big of a role the hammer played in this story, and more accurately, the worthiness aspect of it. They had a little dinner party at the beginning where all the Avengers tried to lift the hammer, and it was really fascinating, really interesting. And while it is a setup for future movies down the line, it's also paid off in this very movie when Vision proves his trustworthiness by lifting the hammer, and that is just fantastic. More than that, his fear works so well. Thor is that perfect middle ground between Iron Man and Captain America. He was born as a rich, famous prince, just like Iron Man, and grew up in a life of affluence and wealth, but he lived a life of the soldier. You know, he's been in war, he's been in battles just like Captain America, and he is that middle ground. And his fear relates to both of them. Like Iron Man, he worries that his absence from Asgard will be the reason Asgard falls. But why is he absent from Asgard? Because he's taking time for himself. He's trying to settle down here on Earth with Jane. And he leaves at the end of the movie to confront that and to go seeking answers on Asgard. And I think that's just fantastic, and it works so well. And the movie did a really good job with Thor. Oh, also one thing I forgot to mention about Thor is they really show off his comedic side in this movie. They show him cracking jokes and having some very hilarious lines in this movie, which I think was a great test run for what he goes on to do in Thor Ragnarok. And I really liked that change. I'll talk about it more when I do a Thor Ragnarok review, but for now, I just want to acknowledge the fact that even as early as this movie, they kind of showed off Thor might be changing slightly from the way he was portrayed in the past three movies, Thor 1, Thor 2, and Avengers 1. Next, I want to talk about Black Widow, and her fear of never being able to leave behind the shadow of her Russian spy past is fantastic, and it does a really good job of explaining why she works so hard as an Avenger and to be a hero. Although they did spend a lot of time on her little past segment, but hey, she should have had her own movie at this point, and that's another topic for another day. Also, her friendship with Hawkeye is great. I love how close she is with him as a friend and with his family, and the fact that his kids call her Auntie Nat works so well. But then there's her romance with the Hulk, and that was weird. I remember there was a lot of setup in the Captain America 2, The Winter Soldier, between her and Captain America, and I really liked that, and I was shipping them really hard, not only because it happened in the comics, but also it just seems so natural. The soldier and the spy works so great. But then they did a hard left and decided to throw her with the Hulk. And the only reason I was remotely sold on this was because the actors, Mark Ruffalo and Scarlett Johansson, do a really good job of selling a believable scene between these two characters that they could actually kind of flirt and be in love. But then you kind of take a step back and like, wait, this doesn't really make any sense. And it's kind of sad that they felt the need to give her a romantic interest in this movie because I feel like she could have worked great without it, and I'm really glad that they kind of just shoved this thing under the rug for the rest of the MCU and didn't really address it again. Which leads me perfectly into the Hulk. And I feel bad for the Hulk because I feel like he was kind of done dirty in this film. Not only with the weird romance between him and Black Widow, but also because they took away his win at the end of Avengers 1. At the end there, he showed some control over the Hulk. I'm always angry. And it just worked so well. But then in this movie, they took away that sense of control. Now he needs outside help. Now he needs to have a lullaby sung to him by Black Widow. It just didn't make that much sense. And that's unfortunate. That being said, his fear of terrorizing people does make a lot of sense, and the fear that he will be a monster works really, really well. I don't exactly know why he then went on to terrorize a town, because everyone else had the kind of opposite reaction to their fear. Cap feared settling down, so what does he do at the end of the movie? He doesn't settle down. He puts his heart into the work of the Avengers. Iron Man feared the world being taken over by an alien invasion. He didn't start an alien invasion. Rather, he tried to work against his fear. So I feel like Hulk, what he should have done after he fears terrorizing people is run away from people and hide out in solitude. But that being said, I do love the Hulkbuster scene. I think it's so cool and one of the highlights of this film. And so I wouldn't want to lose that. I just never fully understood the reasoning behind it. So if someone does have a better explanation or understanding of this scene, please leave it down in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts. Lastly, in terms of the main 6 Avengers, we have Hawkeye, and he doesn't really get a fear placed upon him by Scarlet Witch, but I actually really enjoyed that because it just shows a little bit of growth from the previous movie, and it was a really funny scene, so worked out great. That being said, we do see his fear. He fears losing his family, and seeing the lengths and the effort he went to protecting his family, with keeping them off the S.H.I.E.L.D. record books so that like no one could hack S.H.I.E.L.D. and figure out where his family lived or anything, is just crazy and awesome. And I really do appreciate seeing his family and the love he has there. And seeing a strong, happy family in the MCU was really nice. So yeah, I like Hawkeye. Moving on to the villains, let's start by talking about the Maximoff Twins. And I really appreciate their inclusion in this film. I think it works great, seeing the dynamic characterization going from bad guys to good guys. And the reasoning all makes a lot of sense. In the beginning, they're bad guys. They don't like the Avengers because they blame Iron Man and his war profiteering for the destitute state of Sokovia. They have that story where a bomb fell into their apartment. It didn't go off, but they saw the word Stark, and they've hated him ever since. And I really like how well that story connects to the first Iron Man movie, where this bomb is the result of the illegal war profiteering that Iron Man's company was profiting from. They were selling weapons to both sides, and that caused Sokovia to kind of be caught in the middle and have problems. And I really appreciate just how well this movie connects back to that, because that was like 8-9 movies ago, and that's just crazy. So naturally, they want revenge on Iron Man and all of the Avengers. But the key is that the Maximoff Twins are still good at heart. They wanted justice to begin with. They were seeking it out through revenge, but they just wanted justice ultimately. But when they realize that Ultron is evil and he plans to destroy all of humanity, they turn on him and they choose to work with the Avengers to stop him. And I love that, and I think it works so well. I also really appreciate that the Maximoff Twins have such a good relationship with Hawkeye. He has hilarious banter between him and Quicksilver that still puts a smile on my face to this day. It's true humor, and it's really funny. And then he gives that really strong pep talk to Wanda Maximoff saying, hey, the city is flying, there's an army of robots, and I have a bow and arrow. But I'm an Avenger, and you can be an Avenger too. And I really appreciate it. It's funny, but it also makes sense. And I really like the self-humor and how much the world of the MCU can make fun of itself. And I really just appreciate Hawkeye's role, and it really reinforces that Hawkeye is in fact a father, and he's helping the younger generation, not just with his kids, but also with the younger superheroes. And I just love it. It is so good. And I guess now is as good a time as any to talk about Pietro's death, because I know a lot of people think that he should have been able to dodge the bullets, and to a certain extent, I agree with you. I do question, the bullets were moving very fast, faster than normal bullets, and maybe he was just so focused on Hawkeye that he didn't really care about the bullets at the time. I don't know, but whether you like it or not is up to you. As for me, I'm alright with it for two big story reasons. One, it proved that he was a true Avenger, being willing to lay down his life for others. And two, I think the MCU just didn't want to have to deal with a speedster in their upcoming movies. They didn't want to have to write around the speedster aspect. And so I'm okay with that. Ironically, by them not wanting to have to write around it, they wrote a situation that doesn't make sense to a lot of people. So kind of funny, but doesn't really matter. Moving on to our big bad evil guy, let's talk about Ultron, the main villain himself. And I love him. He is absolutely an Avengers level threat, and he is a strength to this movie. One of the first things that struck me about him is how he talks and acts like a human. It was something I wasn't expecting going into this film, because in previous versions he always talked like a robot, negative, this action is illogical and stuff like that. But in this one, he is so lifelike, he is so human. He forgets words, he makes jokes, he stutters. It's so close to being human, but not quite, because Wanda Maximoff couldn't read his mind. And more importantly, he misinterprets his mission statement, his primary objective, so wrong in a way that only a robot could misinterpret it. And I really like that. As a fan of like iRobot and stuff, I really like robots misinterpreting their main objective. It's quite funny and quite fascinating and stuff. And so we see he's told to protect the Earth, to keep it safe, but then he can't keep it safe from the humans itself, and so he decides to kill all of the humans and become the humans' legacy. It's egotistical, just like Iron Man, but it's also robotical, just like the robot that he is. And I love it, and it makes sense, which is crazy because he's this over-the-top villain that, wants to destroy humanity with a big doomsday asteroid and stuff, but he grounds it. He makes it make sense. And that's an accomplishment of this film. That is awesome. And I think one of the reasons behind that is because Ultron has this personal connection to Iron Man and hates Iron Man. And that makes it not just this thing of robots and this esoteric idea of robots and logic and all that stuff, but it's a personal level of, I hate Iron Man, so I want to destroy what he loves. He loves the human race, and so I will kill him for that. And that makes sense, and that is why I love Ultron as a villain. But to round off the last couple characters that we see in this movie, Nick Fury was a really fun inclusion. He came at the perfect time to uplift the Avengers and help them out of their slump, which I think worked great. Maria Hill was a really fun sort of girl in the chair for the Avengers, and that worked wonderfully. And then you have Strucker, and he was a pretty good villain, face of Hydra at the beginning of the movie, but I am really sad how underutilized he was, because he's a really cool villain in the comics, but in this one he just dies in the very first movie he appears in and doesn't even have any of his cool gadgets or gizmos or anything. So, but whatevs, I don't really care about him. Vision, however, I do care about. I think he works more as a plot point than a character in this movie, and that's unfortunate. But I will say that I appreciate how powerful they showed Vision in this movie. He phases through some of the robots. He shoots the power of the Infinity Stone like a laser out of his little forehead jewel, and he is strong and powerful. And I really like that about Vision. It's unfortunate they didn't do that ever really again in the MCU. So wow, there are a lot of characters in this film. The movie goes out of its way to develop 9 of them, and that's crazy. That's more depth than both Infinity War or Endgame, and that's insane to me because while those movies do have bigger casts, they focus and have a lot more focus on just like 6 characters usually, which when it comes to Avengers Age of Ultron developing 9, that's ridiculous. It's something that I praise about the movie that I really appreciate now, but it's something that I also kind of dislike about the movie because it causes the film to drag and feel so long. It doesn't give the rest of the movie time to breathe. And don't get me wrong, I love the character work. Individually, it's fantastic. And in hindsight, every single one of the character development that happens here gets paid off in later movies. And that's wonderful. I would have it no other way. But that being said, it still hurts the film. It still makes this film feel like a drag. Now, I will acknowledge the irony. I know I've spent the last 18 minutes talking about character work in my own video, and that's probably going to make this video be drag and be very long. But you know what? I don't care. I like this movie. I want to talk about each of the characters. I want to give it the time it deserves. And that means making a longer video. So there you have it. So let's finally talk about the plot of this film, because the plot is really good, and it's more complex than the first Avengers film. It has an advantage over Avengers 1 in that in this movie, the Avengers are already together. They've already been formed and stuff. Avengers 1 spent most of its movie just trying to get the Avengers together, and that worked perfectly for that movie. It is exactly what that film needed, but it didn't allow for a very complex story. Fast forward to this movie, and now we're free for the Avengers to go wherever the story needs. And where this story goes and starts is a day in the life of the Avengers. They're taking down superpowered criminals. They're working together like a team. They have funny banter over their comms, language. They may not be a family in the same way that the Guardians of the Galaxy team is a family, but they are a tight-knit squad, and it genuinely makes me believe that they are friends. This continues in the scenes at the Avengers Tower, where Tony and Bruce decide to work on artificial intelligence, but Tony, knowing the team so well, being so close with them, chooses not to tell them because he knows they wouldn't like it. And that is brilliant. And then you have the fantastic party and all the fun that goes on there. But once again, it works to reinforce the idea that this is a tight-knit group. The little after party where they're working on lifting the hammer flows so naturally because it makes us feel like they're a team. And we enjoy that scene so much because it endears us, the audience, to the Avengers. They don't just tell us this is a close-knit team. They show us that this is a close-knit team. And that is brilliant. And this is important, this initial setup of the beginning of the movie, because then when Ultron does inevitably break up the party and causes everything to go flying and whatnot, he does so not only physically but also mentally, because now the Avengers are at odds ends, arguing over the merit of Ultron in the first place. And this argument, this difference of personality that's brought to a head by Ultron's very existence, continues throughout the rest of the film. And it makes it so much more sad to see the Avengers now split up, now arguing with each other and being at odds ends because they were just together. They just were working so well together, and now that's all gone. Now, obviously, it's not completely gone. The Avengers are still working together, and this idea and these issues are brought to a head in the next movie, Captain America: Civil War. But that's beside the point. In this movie, it still works so well because Ultron does succeed in his mission. He hurts the Avengers, not just physically, but emotionally. Which brings me to the villain's plot. And this is another neutral issue I take with the film, because on the one hand, I really like the plot that we got. I really like Ultron's master plan. It works and it makes a lot of sense. But on the other hand, you have a lot of people bringing up the very real issue of he's such a digital force. Like, he can hack into so many things and, is the smartest artificial intelligence on the planet that the world has ever seen. Why is he even struggling to take down the Avengers? I know the movie explains that he couldn't get access to the nuclear codes because Jarvis was secretly protecting those, and I would assume that Jarvis could also logically be secretly protecting Stark Tech and the Stark Tech Tower and all that stuff, but he did delete all the files from Stark Tower and stuff, so it's kind of questionable there. And ultimately, even without all of that, there's just the simple fact that he could cause enough public mayhem over the internet, cause enough mass hysteria that his little subplot of finding a vibranium would be the least of the Avengers' worries. They'd be so bogged down helping with traffic, helping with humanity and whatnot, that they wouldn't be able to focus on finding him and saving that and causing problems and stuff. And so it's a little bit of an issue. But the reason I don't have as big of a problem with it is because Jarvis is in the internet. They do explain that he's there and he is stopping Ultron from doing anything too major, too disastrous, and maybe that extends to mass hysteria. I don't know. And they also explain how Vision locks Ultron out of the internet at the start of the final battle. And I really like that they went out of their way to explain both of these things because it does make it more believable. Ultimately, I still have to suspend my disbelief because I believe Ultron should have been able to escape in something like that and all this good stuff. And there's 1,000 good stories that explain how Ultron hid himself in some digital pocket space or whatever. But I don't care. Ultimately, Ultron was always going to be a very powerful villain and somewhat too powerful. I mean, in the comics, he's basically too powerful. Iron Man often has to go up against him in a suit that does not have access to the internet or very much digital workings at all, just so that he could fight him without his suit getting corrupted. And I think that's a little bit ridiculous, a little over the top, but isn't that the classic problem of Avengers villains? They're either too powerful because they have to take on 6 different heroes, or they're not powerful enough because... And you'd think, wait, this isn't believable that these 6 heroes would really have a struggle beating this one villain. And I think that's just the ultimate balancing act. Could they have written it better? Yes, absolutely. But is Ultron still a good villain that I enjoy and appreciate? Yes. And so I'm not going to fault the movie for creating a villain that's too powerful, because they were following the comics rather well, and they did do a decent job. They tried, at least, to explain why he wasn't able to just have this total complete takeover, with the fact that Jarvis's sub-programs and whatnot were still alive, and the fact that Vision locked him out at the end of the film. So an attempt was made, it just wasn't perfect, and I'm okay with that. Moving on, now that we have the plot hole of Ultron talked about and taken care of, I just want to give a brief shout out to how well this plot is constructed, because it has a lot of setups and payoffs that feel very rewarding as an audience member. Whether it's Hawkeye joking about not having a girlfriend, which is eventually paid off, and we see that not only does he have a wife, but he also has an entire family and a farm, which is really cool. Or Helen Cho, she's introduced at the start of this movie. She has this advanced new medical technology that can essentially grow cells, and that's paid off later on down the road to show how Ultron plans to use the vibranium to evolve himself. And that's a really smart, cool connection that just works so well, and a really cool way to make Vision a unique robot of his, more than just saying, well, I designed him more unique than any other. It's like, no, we used vibranium and this other technology to make the Vision unique and special. And I think that's really cool. And so this movie does a lot with setups and payoffs, and it just flows well from one end to another. The main thing I have against the plot, like I said in my character section, was that the character development just bogs it down. They spend so much focus on character that it really hurts this movie. And that's unfortunate, but it is what it is. Which brings me to the final battle. And I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but I just want to simply say I do not mind another CGI army. It is a great way to involve all 9 Avengers and have them show off their various abilities. Ultimately, I like seeing superheroes use their superpowers, and having CGI minions for them to kill indefinitely is a great way to do that with a team of heroes. It's not the only way to do that, but it is a good way nonetheless. Avengers 1 did it better, I think. I think every scene in their little fight in New York was a lot more memorable and unique, but that's not to say that this film doesn't have its fair share of unique and fun scenes. And especially the church scene, where all of the Avengers are protecting the Doomsday device, and they do it in slow motion and stuff, is very fun, very exciting, and very well done. And one thing where this final battle does shine compared to all other Avengers movies is the uniqueness of its setting. So I love the final battle setting so much because it isn't just a backdrop to the action. It's actually a plot point of the movie. The city they're fighting in is literally the Doomsday device of Ultron. He's going to use it as an asteroid to destroy the Earth. And that is something that no other Avengers movie does. Avengers 1 has New York, and they honestly use New York pretty well. It's not as memorable as this one, but they do use it pretty well. Avengers 3 Infinity War, yeah, they're fighting in Wakanda, but it's basically just a field. And Avengers Endgame is even worse. It's just a charred piece of Earth after Thanos decimated the, Avengers, whatever it's called or stuff. So, doesn't matter. Avengers Age of Ultron has the most memorable setting to its final battle, and I really like that. It's just as memorable, maybe a little bit less than the Star Wars Death Star or the Pirates of the Caribbean Maelstrom in Pirates of the Caribbean 3 at World's End. So I really like how this movie ends in that sense. In terms of other setting aspects to Avengers Age of Ultron, I really appreciate all the different locations they go to, whether it's Johannesburg, Seoul, Korea, or Sokovia. They're all fun little locations, and it was a really fun thing to show the Avengers going around on this globe-trotting adventure, if you will. The last thing I want to talk about when it comes to setting is the Mind Stone, this Infinity Stone that is shown in this movie. I really like how they show off its use and powers and abilities in this film. It's basically an artificial intelligence that's the smartest there ever is. Iron Man gives this artificial intelligence a little mission to protect the Earth, and it morphs into Ultron and creates this killer robot, which is really good and really well done. And once again, just like the first Avengers movie, it shows the dangers of messing with Infinity Stones. This connects to the Infinity Saga so well, and I really, really appreciate that. As to the retcon that the Mind Stone was always in Loki's staff, I think it's a little weird. I think it doesn't make a ton of sense why Thanos would give up an Infinity Stone to go get another Infinity Stone, but it's not the end of the world. It really doesn't matter, and I'm okay with it, you know? And it's one of those things that just kind of makes me smile because it reminds me that the MCU, however good it is, it's not perfect. It still has its own little retcons and its own little fixes and stuff, so yeah. So, to close out, in talking about the standout scenes, I already talked about how the dinner party is very enjoyable and the final battle is very memorable. I also like Captain America versus Ultron. It's a really fun precursor to Captain America versus Iron Man in his next movie. But the one scene that I really want to highlight in this section is just Iron Man in the Hulkbuster armor versus Hulk. That was so cool. I can't emphasize enough how awesome it was. It was just so fun for me, who's a comic book nerd and fan, to see that put to screen. It was really exciting. And yes, it was over the top. There was a lot of needless destruction that happened, but it was still so cool. And I loved every single one of the gadgets that Iron Man had to try and beat the Hulk. But despite all of that, he wasn't able to take him down fully, you know? The Hulk still put up quite the fight, and it was enjoyable, it was fun, and it might not make a lot of sense, as I explained earlier, but I still love it, I still enjoy it. So, to conclude this video, I want to talk about the legacy of this film and my overall thoughts and just kind of recap them. This film is often derided for a couple of reasons. We talked about how it didn't live up to the hype of the previous films, Captain America Winter Soldier and Guardians of the Galaxy. It was bogged down with too much character development, and its main villain was a bit of a plot hole. And I agree with all of those things. I think all of those are very valid and very real reasons to not like this movie. But ultimately, I just don't care. I accept that those problems exist, but I ignore them, and I enjoy this movie despite all of that, and I still love this film. There is, however, one other reason I think this movie is kind of looked down upon that isn't talked about very much, and that is that this movie, Avengers Age of Ultron, signified, in my opinion, the death of the grounded MCU. Up until this point, all the other movies have been fairly grounded and tried to make sense of the MCU. Even Thor 2, with all of the weird convergence and space elves and stuff, still tried to explain that they weren't gods. They were just aliens that live 5,000 years or so and are stronger and better and faster than humans. But they weren't gods, you know? Fast forward to this movie, and Thor is taking a bath in a pool that gives you magic visions. And there is Wanda Maximoff, a magic user. And Iron Man doesn't shoot repulsor blasts anymore. No, he shoots straight up lasers. Like, there is no other excuse for it. Those are laser beams and stuff. And you have a magical Infinity Stone that gives life to a robot. Like, the city is flying, and I have a bow and arrow. Like, none of this makes sense. It is a comic book action hero movie now, not a sci-fi movie that tries to explain superpowers. The grounded MCU died with this film, and I'm okay with that. I love Avengers Age of Ultron. I love the fact that the shackles came off and that they started going in a different direction, but I know a lot of people weren't, and that is why this movie isn't as liked anymore today. That being said, I don't care. I love Avengers Age of Ultron, and I think it's a fantastic Avengers movie, and I will always feel that way. I love this movie, and that's how I'm going to end the video. Yep. Bye.